Hey guys, this is Katie with another CreepyPasta for you all. The title of this one is called The Man in the Road. I really enjoyed this one, so I hope you guys do too. Let's get started. I sat quietly sipping my glass of wine and wishing desperately that the evening would come to an end. Two of my friends, Brad and Lori, had been invited to a get-together with another friend of ours. He lived across the river in St. Louis and we hardly got to see him, so when he invited us to a wine tasting he was hosting, we jumped at the chance. Brad being kind enough to give us a lift for the evening. The guests were mostly old friends of the host and, as such, shared many of his old war stories. Stories of his drunken youth filled with all manner of crazy stunts and funny events. I was sitting apart from the crowd because I had very little to offer the conversation. My childhood, by contrast, was very tame and I always felt a little embarrassed trying to compete. Something about these kind gatherings always made me feel very self-conscious. But I was here to visit a friend, so I put on a brave face and tried to mingle with very little success. Every conversation I tried to take part in was alien to me. Tours of duty in the military or one-night stand in drunken revelry. I mostly just stood amongst the group and listened, occasionally trying to add into the merriment, but only proving, if only in my own mind, how very little I belonged here. I eventually ended up sitting by the glass sliding doors that led to the back porch. All around me, people were laughing and talking about old times and good friends now far away. And even though I longed to be a part of the conversation, I just couldn't work up the courage. I sat quietly sipping my wine and waiting for the others to decide to go when the light suddenly flickered and went out. A few people cursed at the sudden darkness while our host fumbled for a flashlight. As I stood up to help him, my gaze turned to the sliding door and to a dark figure just outside the fence. I lingered for a moment just staring at him. He was standing out of the light of the street lamps, which were also flickering themselves. I couldn't make him out in the darkness, but I could tell that he was very tall and he was facing the house. The figure stood perfectly still, and as I watched him, even though I knew I was just as hidden as he was by the darkness, I still felt as though he was watching me. This entire event only lasted a few seconds, and as I turned to help to find some form of light, the power kicked back on. I turned to look back toward the tall figure, but all of a sudden he was gone. Eventually the party wound down and the guests began to leave. Brad, Lori, and I lingered for just a little longer and thanked our friend for a lovely evening before departing. I never did mention the strange figure to anyone that night, but in hindsight I desperately wish that I had. I sat in the back and talked to my friends as we started through the thick woods that led us to the highway. The road that passed through these woods had no street lights, and the road itself was very narrow. It was a wonder that there hadn't been more accidents on it. I was sitting in the back talking to Brad, who was driving, and Lori in the passenger seat when Brad suddenly yelled. The car swerved sharply as Brad tried to avoid the tall man that had appeared from nothing in the middle of the road, and as we screeched past him, he was illuminated for just a brief moment. All I could make out as the car sped past was that he was very tall and he wore a black suit, but I could not make out any further detail as the car started to roll. I can't recall how many times the car rolled, but I had slammed my head hard against the roof after our first roll and things had become very fuzzy after that. I do remember wishing that I had buckled my seatbelt, and I also remember the sudden landing. The car made a sickening sound as it hit, the screaming sound of metal on pavement and a thud as one of the occupants landed outside, thrown out during our violent accident. Sight returned to me slowly and I found I was half out of the window of the overturned car, but I could hear a quiet sobbing somewhere in the dark. I looked around and saw the car, mostly whole, but many chunks had been torn free, almost as if it had been gnawed by some terrible creature. I saw Brad lying on his back toward the front. His head was bleeding heavily, and his right arm was bent at an impossible angle. I couldn't tell if he was breathing or not. The dark woods hid everything beyond the wreck in an inky sheet of night, and may as well have been a void of space outside of the dimming glow of the headlights. I tried to pull myself up to check on my friends, but the moment I tried to move, I saw pain. Not felt pain, mind you, but I saw it in a flash before my eyes in a spectrum of pale colors as I tried to move. Even the thought of movement hurt me. I just lay in the road by the car for who knows how long. I was still half in the window trying to muster the strength to crawl out when I finally saw Brad move. At first I was very relieved. Obviously he was alive if he was moving, but something was just so unnatural about his moves. He moved in very short jerks. his body slowly turning on until his feet were out of the beam of the headlights pointing at the inky dark beyond. I lifted myself up best as I could to try to make sense of what was happening. Brad's limp form jerked once, then twice, and then, like a bullet of rocket, off into the darkness he went, and he was gone. The movement was so sudden, I questioned if I had even seen it at all. I tried to move again, but was rewarded with these flashes of pain. I only managed to get out of the window and into the street. That's when I heard the crying grow louder and more urgent. At first, the crying was a tired kind of sob, not the bawling of a child, but like a person who had been through too much suffering in too short of time. Now it sounded frantic and panicked. I heard a brief scuffling out of sight on the other side of the car, and then silence. I held my breath waiting for what I don't know, and after a few short seconds that stretched forever, the night air was pierced by a shrill cry. To call the stillness that followed silence would not have done it any justice. This silence had weight to it, and I felt it on my chest as I looked around me and saw the light of the headlights growing dimmer. I noticed then that there was no sound at all, not even the sound of the insects or the nocturnal animals of the woods. Something was near the wreck, hiding just out of the shrinking circle of light, some unnatural thing that even the beasts of these dark woods feared. Forgetting my pain altogether, I started dragging my body closer to the front of the car. I had the insane notion that if I were just to stay in the light, then I would be safe. Just as I reached the front of the car, a sudden and sharp pain shot through my head. It was so abrupt and intense that my vision blurred in one solid color. My vision cleared quickly, but the intense pain remained. As I looked around me, I noticed the headlights had dimmed even more in this short time. They were slowly going out, the dark void of the woods slowly moving in on me. It was then that I noticed a faint figure in the dim light. It was just enough in the shadows that I couldn't see it clearly, but it had the shape of a tall man. He stood perfectly still, just staring at me. At first I had hoped that he was there to help, some kind passerby that had seen the wreck, but the longer I looked at him, the more wrong he just seemed. I could tell he was tall, but he was unnaturally tall. In fact, and his limbs had stretched to an oddly proportion for any normal man. I tried to call out for help, to him or to anyone that could hear me, but the only sound that I could manage was a raspy croak, in response to which he just tilted his head to one side and stared at me. As soon as he tilted his head, the vision-blurring pain returned, now more intense than ever. My vision didn't clear completely this time, but still I noticed the man had gotten closer, only I couldn't recall him moving at all. He just seemed to appear closer to me in the brief moment that I lost my sight, almost as if he had teleported. As he stood in the ever-failing light of the car, I could see him clearly now. He was clad in a dark suit with a white shirt and a red tie, which seemed even more surreal with his inhuman proportions. But as I was soon to learn, these were his tamest features. My gaze slowly rose to his face, and at first I couldn't take it all in. My mind reeled at the sight of his face. He had a lack of a face. Where a face should have been was a blank mass of flesh in the vague shape of a human head, which was tilted slightly to one side, almost quizzically as he looked down at me. Having seen the whole of him, I tried to scream, but couldn't even muster a croak. Just then the pain grew even more intense, and once again my vision had blurred. As before, the tall man appeared closer to me, but never even moved. He was right over me at this point. My vision stayed fuzzy around the edges, clearing at random now. He stood over me and began twitching slightly, his faceless gaze never leaving me as the headlights flickered. Wispy dark shapes began to form around him, and I thought vaguely of a smoke as the shapes turned into writhing tendrils. Sharp claws protruded out of his hands and formed as his teeth. The tall man quickly moved toward me, and the tendrils reached out as the headlights finally flickered out. As the inky black enveloped me, another sharp cry filled the dark woods. I had finally found the courage to scream as his tendrils reached out to me. That was it. So I really hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel if you would like. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you guys later. Bye.